My name is Jean, and at 67 years old, I still drive the same old sedan and live in my modest Boston home, despite what my bank account might suggest. I thought my only son Michael's wedding day would be filled with joy and celebration. Instead, I found myself standing there, cheeks burning, as my new daughter-in-law Cassandra introduced me to her wealthy parents as the family embarrassment they were stuck with. What none of them knew was just how wrong that label would prove to be. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been judged unfairly for your appearance. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in South Boston where my parents taught me that education, hard work, and good character were far more valuable than material possessions. My father worked at the shipyard for 30 years, while my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families across the city. Every night at dinner, they would remind me that true wealth came from within, not from what you owned or how you dressed. When I met Thomas during my sophomore year at Boston University, we connected instantly over our shared values. We were both scholarship students working multiple jobs to cover our expenses. On our first date, he took me to the public gardens with homemade sandwiches rather than an expensive restaurant. I knew then he was someone special. After graduation, we married in a small ceremony with just 20 guests in my parents' backyard. Thomas had a degree in computer science, and I studied business management. We both found entry-level jobs, saved every penny we could, and dreamed of someday starting our own business. In 1983, with $10,000 in savings, we took the plunge. Our first office was our basement, with 2 desks we found at a yard sale and a single telephone line. Our tech consulting firm specialized in helping small businesses manage their inventory. Most people thought we were crazy to leave stable jobs during an economic downturn, but we believed in our vision. The breakthrough came 3 years later, when Thomas developed an innovative software program that revolutionized how businesses track their inventory. It was faster, more accurate, and more user-friendly than anything on the market. Orders started pouring in, and within 5 years, we had 50 employees and moved into a proper office building. Everything changed in 1997 when Thomas was diagnosed with stage 2 pancreatic cancer. Between treatments, he insisted we discuss the future of our company. "Jean," he told me one evening, as we sat on our porch, "we've built something valuable, but I want you to consider selling if the right offer comes along. Life is too short to be tied down to a business." A major tech corporation had been courting us for months, and with Thomas's blessing, I negotiated a sale price of $87 million. It was a staggering amount for 2 kids from working-class backgrounds. When the final papers were signed, Thomas squeezed my hand and whispered, "Let's keep this between us. Money changes how people see you, and I don't want that for us or for Michael." Our son Michael was just 10 years old at the time, and we decided to honor Thomas's wish. We moved to a slightly nicer, but still modest neighborhood, continued to live frugally, and focused on giving Michael a normal childhood with strong values. The only splurge was ensuring his college education would be fully covered. Meanwhile, I worked with financial advisors to invest our windfall wisely. Over 3 decades, through careful investments in real estate, emerging technologies, and sustainable businesses, our net worth grew to over $4 billion. But to the outside world, we remained a middle-class family. Thomas fought his cancer bravely for years, with periods of remission that gave us precious time together. He passed away 8 years ago after 35 years of marriage, leaving me alone to carry on our shared philosophy about wealth and privacy. The grief was overwhelming, but having our financial security allowed me to process my loss without additional worries. After his death, I threw myself into our anonymous charitable foundation, which funded educational programs, medical research, and community development projects. I derived more satisfaction from seeing the impact of these initiatives than I ever would from buying mansions or yachts. Michael grew up with no idea of our true financial situation. We raised him to earn his own way just as we had. He worked summer jobs, took out student loans that I quietly paid off behind the scenes, and chose a career as a high school history teacher. I couldn't have been prouder of the compassionate, hardworking man he became. When he called me 3 years ago to tell me about meeting someone special at a school fundraiser, I was thrilled. Cassandra worked in marketing for luxury brands and had volunteered to help with the event. According to Michael, she was beautiful, ambitious, and charismatic. He sounded happier than I'd heard him in years. Our first meeting was at an upscale restaurant downtown. The moment Cassandra walked in, wearing designer clothes and carrying a handbag that probably cost more than my monthly expenses, I sensed we might have different values. Throughout dinner, she spoke mostly about celebrity clients' exclusive events she'd attended and her recent trip to Monaco. Each time Michael tried to include me in the conversation by mentioning my volunteer work or gardening hobby, Cassandra would politely acknowledge it before steering the topic back to her world. As she examined my sensible shoes and department store dress, I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't quite disdain, but it was clear she was making assessments based on appearances. Still, she was dating my son, and I was determined to find common ground. "Your mother is so quaint," she told Michael as we said our goodbyes. The way she paused before selecting that word told me everything I needed to know, but I smiled and thanked her for a lovely evening. For Michael's sake, I would try my best with Cassandra. Over the next 14 months, I watched as Michael and Cassandra's relationship deepened, along with the subtle changes in my son. His modest wardrobe gradually gave way to expensive brands. His reliable sedan was traded for a luxury sports car that stretched his teacher's salary. Even his vocabulary shifted, adopting Cassandra's casual references to exclusive restaurants and vacation destinations I knew he couldn't afford. Cassandra rarely visited my quaint home, always finding excuses when Michael suggested dinner there. On the few occasions she did come, she would glance around with barely concealed judgment, as if my comfortable but unfashionable furniture was somehow offensive. During one dinner, I caught her wiping her water glass with her napkin when she thought I wasn't looking. "Mom keeps this place exactly as it was when Dad was alive," Michael explained apologetically. "It has sentimental value." "Of course it does," Cassandra replied with a tight smile. "Sentiment is so important." But the way she emphasized the word made it sound like a character flaw rather than a virtue. After 3 months of dating, Michael arranged for me to meet Cassandra's parents, Harold and Diana Wilson. The dinner took place at their waterfront mansion in Beacon Hill, complete with staff serving a 5-course meal on china that probably cost more than my car. Harold Wilson, a third-generation real estate developer, spent most of the evening talking about his latest acquisition, a historic building he planned to convert into luxury condominiums. "And what do you do, Diana?" asked over dessert, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her crystal wine glass. "I owned a small tech consulting business with my late husband," I answered truthfully. "I'm retired now, but I keep busy with community projects." "How?" fulfilling, Diana responded, exchanging glances with Harold. The conversation quickly turned to their recent Mediterranean cruise and the celebrities they'd encountered on board. Later that evening, as we were leaving, I overheard Harold telling Michael, "Teaching is such a noble profession, but if you're ever interested in something more ambitious, I have connections." When Michael and Cassandra announced their engagement 8 months later at the Wilsons' summer soiree, I tried to share in their happiness despite my reservations. The ring on Cassandra's finger featured a diamond so large it seemed to weigh down her hand. Michael later confided that Harold had helped with the purchase, as it cost more than his annual salary. The wedding planning began immediately, with famous coordinator Amanda Taylor taking charge. Every decision revolved around impressions and appearances. The venue had to be the most exclusive hotel in Boston. The flowers needed to be imported from 3 different countries. The guest list included business moguls, minor celebrities, and society figures I'd never heard of. Throughout the process, my input was neither sought nor welcomed. When I suggested incorporating a family tradition into the ceremony, Amanda exchanged looks with Cassandra before explaining that it wouldn't fit the aesthetic they were creating. "We need to maintain a certain standard," Cassandra said, patting my hand as if I were a child who didn't understand. "Trust me, it's better this way." Meanwhile, Michael was becoming more distant. Our weekly dinners became monthly, then sporadic. When we did speak, he served as a messenger between Cassandra and me, relaying requests about what I should wear, how I should style my hair, and even how I should speak to the Wilsons' social circle. One afternoon I stopped by Michael's apartment to drop off his father's cufflinks as a wedding gift. Through the partially open door, I heard Cassandra on the phone with what sounded like a friend. "His mother has absolutely no sense of style," she was saying with a laugh. "Everything she owns looks like it came from a bargain store. I'm having nightmares about her showing up in some polyester nightmare and embarrassing us in front of everyone." My heart sank, but I quietly left, without making my presence known. Later that week, during a rare lunch with just Michael, I tried to broach the subject of how Cassandra seemed to view me. "Mom, you're being oversensitive," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Cassandra just comes from a different world. She wants everything to be perfect, including how our families present themselves." "I'm not sure I recognize you anymore, Michael," I said softly. "Your father and I raised you to value people for who they are, not what they wear or how they look." His face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Maybe I'm finally breaking out of the small world you and Dad created. There's nothing wrong with wanting nice things or moving in better circles." Those words stung more than he knew. The small world we'd created had been a deliberate choice, one designed to protect him from the very values he was now embracing. But I kept my silence, unwilling to reveal our family secret out of spite or hurt feelings. I tried several times to connect with Cassandra through cooking, gardening, or sharing family stories, thinking perhaps we could find common ground. Each attempt was met with polite disinterest or thinly veiled condescension. When I offered to teach her my grandmother's apple pie recipe, she informed me that she preferred desserts from a specific French patisserie. When I invited her to help plant spring bulbs in my garden, she declined, saying gardening would ruin her manicure. With the wedding approaching, Cassandra's control over every aspect of Michael's life intensified. She reorganized his apartment, replaced his comfortable clothes with designer alternatives, and even suggested he consider administrative positions that would pay better than teaching. Each time I witnessed these changes, a piece of my heart broke for the authentic, compassionate son who seemed to be fading away. As the wedding date approached, the planning meetings became increasingly uncomfortable. At one session focused on family traditions, I tentatively mentioned how Thomas and I had written our own vows. "That's very 1980s, Cassandra said with a tight smile. "We're going with traditional vows, but updated to remove any outdated gender roles." Amanda, the wedding planner, quickly changed the subject, asking about my choice of attire for the ceremony. I showed them a photo of a navy blue dress and jacket I'd purchased at a department store. Cassandra's horror was impossible to hide. "You can't possibly wear that," she exclaimed. "It looks so outdated. Mother has already arranged for us to visit Neiman Marcus for something appropriate." 2 days later, I found myself in an upscale fitting room with Cassandra and Diana hovering outside the door, passing judgment on every outfit I tried. "The silhouette does nothing for her figure," Diana stage whispered. "We need something slimming, but not trying too hard," Cassandra replied. "She doesn't have the posture for anything structured." They spoke as if I couldn't hear them, as if I were an inconvenient problem to solve rather than the mother of the groom. Eventually, they selected a designer outfit with a price tag that made me wince. When I protested the expense, Cassandra waved away my concerns. "It's an investment in the wedding photos," she said firmly. "Besides, Harold insists on covering it." The alteration appointments, hair consultations, and makeup trials that followed made me feel like a doll being prepared for display. Each time I expressed an opinion or preference, it was politely acknowledged and promptly ignored. Michael, when I tried to discuss it with him, became defensive. "They're trying to help Mom," he insisted during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "Can't you just be grateful and go along with it? This wedding is important for Cassandra's family connections." "I thought weddings were about celebrating love and commitment," I replied, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "That's such an oversimplified view," he responded with a sigh. "Of course it's about love, but it's also about joining families and social circles. The Wilsons move in important circles that could benefit both of us." The distance between us grew wider with each conversation. My son, who once shared everything with me now, kept our interactions superficial and brief. The confident young man who had been passionate about teaching history and making a difference in students' lives was being replaced by someone concerned with appearances and connections. My heart broke a little more each time we spoke. One morning, about 2 months before the wedding, I came across a business newspaper article mentioning Harold Wilson's company facing potential bankruptcy. According to the report, a series of risky investments had left the firm overextended, with creditors threatening legal action. Concerned about how this might affect Michael and Cassandra, I discreetly reached out to some former business contacts to learn more. The situation was indeed dire. Harold had leveraged his company to finance an ambitious development project that had encountered significant regulatory hurdles. Without an immediate influx of capital, he would lose not only the new project, but potentially his entire business empire. After careful consideration, I made a decision that surprised even me. Through my investment firm operating under layers of corporate anonymity, I purchased Harold's failing company for substantially more than its market value. The business papers reported only that a mysterious white knight investor had saved Wilson Developments from collapse. Within weeks, the financial crisis that had threatened to derail Cassandra and Michael's wedding plans had seemingly resolved itself. Harold announced to everyone that his company had attracted a major investor who recognized its long-term potential. The wedding preparations continued, without interruption, though I noticed the floral budget and guest list were slightly reduced. I kept my intervention secret, taking private satisfaction in having helped despite their treatment of me. After all, this was for Michael's happiness, not for recognition or gratitude. Still, as the wedding approached, my anxiety and hurt intensified. Would I spend the entire event being treated as an embarrassing necessity, tolerated only because I was the groom's mother? My longtime friend and financial advisor, Sophia, urged me to reconsider my secrecy. "Jean, you've let these people belittle you when you could buy and sell their entire social circle," she said during one of our weekly lunches. "Why not let them know who they're really dealing with?" "Because that would change how they see me for the wrong reasons," I explained. "I want respect based on character, not bank balance. Besides, revealing the truth now would only hurt Michael and make his wedding about my money." Sophia shook her head, but didn't argue further. Instead, she helped me prepare mentally for the upcoming event, suggesting phrases I could use if Cassandra or her parents became too condescending. Little did I know how valuable that preparation would prove to be. The morning of Michael and Cassandra's wedding arrived with perfect weather and impeccable timing, much like everything else in their carefully orchestrated lives. The venue was the Grand Plaza Hotel, where the presidential suite alone cost more per night than most people's monthly mortgage payments. The ballroom had been transformed with thousands of white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and custom silk draperies. The famous chef Jacques Dubois had been flown in from Paris to create the menu, and a Grammy-winning artist was scheduled to perform during the reception. I arrived 2 hours early, as instructed, wearing the designer outfit that had been selected for me, my hair and makeup professionally done, according to Cassandra's specifications. A wedding coordinator I hadn't met before greeted me with a clipboard and an assessing glance. "Mrs. Anderson, you'll be seated here during the ceremony," she said, pointing to a diagram of the seating arrangement. I noticed immediately that I wasn't placed in the traditional front row, reserved for immediate family, but in the second row, behind several of Harold's business associates. There must be a mistake. I said quietly. As mother of the groom, shouldn't I be in the front row? The coordinator's expression didn't change. These arrangements were approved by the bride personally. She felt this would create a more balanced aesthetic for the photographs. I swallowed my hurt and nodded, unwilling to create a scene. This day was about Michael, not about seating arrangements or my wounded feelings. The ceremony itself was a showcase of wealth and status. Cassandra entered on her father's arm, wearing a custom gown that reportedly took 6 months to create. Michael looked handsome in his tuxedo, though I barely recognized the nervous smile he gave me as he passed my row. The vows were traditional, but brief, the exchange of rings flawless, and the kiss perfectly timed for the photographers positioned at multiple angles. The reception that followed was even more extravagant, with 300 guests from Boston's business and society circles mingling over champagne that cost $300 per bottle. During the cocktail hour, Cassandra kept her distance from me, circulating among her parents' friends, and accepting congratulations. Michael made his way to my side, briefly kissing my cheek, before being pulled away to meet someone very important, according to Cassandra's urgent whisper. I found myself standing alone, sipping champagne, and observing the crowd of strangers in designer attire. Several guests glanced my way curiously before turning back to their conversations, clearly wondering who the unaccompanied older woman might be, but not interested enough to introduce themselves. After nearly an hour of this isolation, Cassandra finally approached with her parents in tow, accompanied by a group of distinguished-looking individuals. Harold was speaking animatedly about a recent business acquisition, while Diana nodded along her diamond earrings, catching the light with each movement. "And this is everyone from Michael's side," Cassandra said, gesturing vaguely toward me before focusing on the group. "My husband comes from very simple beginnings." The way she emphasized simple made it sound like a quaint curiosity rather than a genuine background. One of the men, a silver-haired executive type, looked at me with polite interest. "And you are?" Before I could answer, Cassandra cut in with a laugh that sent ice through my veins. "This is Michael's mother, the family embarrassment we're stuck with." The group laughed knowingly, exchanging glances that indicated this was probably not the first time Cassandra had described me this way. Harold chuckled and patted my shoulder with heavy-handed condescension. Diana barely concealed a smirk behind her champagne glass. My stomach dropped, as if I were plummeting from a great height. My face burned with humiliation, and for a moment, my vision actually blurred around the edges. In that instant, I was transported back to the countless nights I'd stayed up with Michael when he was sick, the parent-teacher conferences I'd attended alone after Thomas died, the 3 jobs I'd worked to ensure Michael could participate in school trips and sports before our business took off. All those years of love and sacrifice reduced to the family embarrassment in front of strangers who knew nothing about me or my life. I wanted to walk out. I wanted to reveal exactly who I was and watch their smug expressions collapse. I wanted to tell Michael what his bride truly thought of his mother, but something held me back. Perhaps it was years of practiced restraint, or maybe it was simply my unwillingness to ruin my son's wedding day regardless of how much pain I was feeling. A kind server noticed my distress and discreetly offered a glass of water and directions to a quiet alcove where I could compose myself. As I took a moment alone, I made the decision to maintain my dignity for Michael's sake. I would stay, I would smile, and I would remember that my worth was not determined by Cassandra Wilson or her superficial parents. When I returned to the reception, the dinner service had begun. I was seated at a table far from the bride and groom, surrounded by distant cousins and colleagues who conversed among themselves. From my position, I could watch Michael dancing with his new wife, his face alight with happiness. I remembered teaching him to dance in our living room when he was 7, using a step stool so he could reach high enough to twirl me. That little boy seemed very far away from the man in the designer tuxedo, now spinning beneath crystal chandeliers. As the evening progressed, I found myself alone at my table, the other guests having moved to the dance floor or the open bar. I was contemplating a discreet early departure when Harold Wilson approached, a fresh scotch in hand and an expression of obligatory politeness on his face. "Enjoying yourself, Joni?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "It's Jean," I corrected gently. "And yes, it's a beautiful wedding." Right, Jean." He waved dismissively. "So tell me about your little life. Michael mentioned you were in business before retiring. Something small, I gather." I smiled, years of business negotiations having taught me to maintain composure regardless of provocation. My husband and I owned a tech consulting firm. We specialized in inventory management solutions. Computers, eh? Never could make heads or tails of all that myself. Leave it to the young people now. He took a sip of his scotch. Probably just as well you sold when you did. Market's completely different these days. Requires real capital to compete. The market has certainly evolved, I agreed. Though I find the principles of strategic investment remain fairly consistent across sectors. Harold raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my response. Before he could reply, a nearby conversation about recent fluctuations in tech stocks caught his attention. "Those Silicon Valley types are riding for a fall," commented one guest. "All these unicorn valuations with no solid revenue models. It's 1999 all over again." "Actually," I interjected, "if you look at companies focusing on machine learning applications for traditional industries, there's substantial growth potential with much lower volatility. The real value is in solving existing inefficiencies rather than creating entirely new markets." The group turned to look at me with surprise. Harold studied me with sudden interest. "You follow the markets?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly. "I try to stay informed," I replied modestly. "Old habits from my business days." "What's your take on the healthcare tech sector?" Harold asked, his eyes narrowing. "My firm almost invested in a medical records startup last quarter, but pulled out over regulatory concerns." "Healthcare tech requires a longer horizon than most investors are comfortable with," I explained. "Regulatory hurdles are significant, but that also creates barriers to entry for competitors. The companies that navigate those successfully tend to establish very defensible positions." Harold's casual condescension was gradually giving way to genuine curiosity. He leaned forward, asking increasingly specific questions about various industries and investment strategies. With each detailed, confident response I provided, his expression grew more interested and slightly confused. "For someone who ran a small business, you have remarkably sophisticated market knowledge," he said finally. "Where did you develop this expertise?" I shrugged lightly. "Experience reading, paying attention. The fundamentals of good business don't change much, regardless of scale." Our conversation turned to his recently saved company with Harold, boasting about the mysterious investor who had recognized his firm's underlying value despite temporary difficulties. "Whoever it was had perfect timing," he said, sipping his scotch. "Stepped in right when we needed capital most, and on surprisingly favorable terms. Must have seen something others missed." "Perhaps they utilized a variable equity structure with performance-based milestones," I suggested casually. "It's an approach that protects the investor while giving the existing management incentives for operational improvement." Harold froze his glass halfway to his lips. "That's exactly the structure they used," he said slowly. "How could you possibly know that? Those details weren't in any press release." I realized my mistake immediately, but maintained a calm expression. "It's a fairly standard approach in turnaround situations. I've read about similar deals." Harold was staring at me now, connections forming behind his eyes. "The acquiring company was Horizon Investments," he said carefully, watching my reaction. "Small firm, very private. Operates through a series of shell companies based in Delaware. No one seems to know who's really behind it." I kept my face neutral, but something in my expression must have given me away. Harold's eyes widened suddenly. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice rising. The bank representative mentioned the principal investor was a woman who built a tech company in the 80s, sold it, and has been investing privately ever since. He set his glass down with a thud. Aren't you that secret billionaire who bought my company last month? His words carried in the momentary lull between songs. Several nearby guests turned to look at us, conversation dying, as they registered Harold's shocked expression and my composed silence. Cassandra and Diana, noticing the commotion, hurried over to our table. Michael followed close behind, confusion evident on his face. "What's going on, Daddy?" Cassandra asked, her hand possessively on her father's arm. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water before answering. "Mr. Wilson seems to have realized that Horizon Investments is my company," I said calmly. "And yes, our current assets under management are approximately $4.7 billion. The silence that followed was absolute. Cassandra's face drained of color so completely that for a moment I worried she might faint. Diana froze mid-sentence, her champagne glass suspended in air. Harold's mouth opened and closed, without producing sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. Michael looked between us, all utterly bewildered. "Mom, what are they talking about?" Before I could answer, a camera flash went off. The wedding photographer, unaware of the dramatic revelation unfolding, had captured the tableau of shocked faces for posterity. Somewhere in the background, the DJ, oblivious to the tension, transitioned to an upbeat dance song that now seemed absurdly inappropriate. I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication at seeing their smugness evaporate, sadness that it took wealth to earn their respect, and anxiety about how Michael would react to the secret I'd kept from him his entire life. This must be some kind of mistake. Cassandra finally managed, her voice higher than normal. "Michael would have told me if his family had money." "Michael didn't know," I said, simply meeting my son's confused gaze. "His father and I decided long ago that he should grow up valuing work and character above wealth and status. Apparently we succeeded." Cassandra recovered quickly, forcing a brittle laugh. "Well, this is certainly a surprise. What a wonderful wedding gift, to learn about our family's good fortune." Her voice carried just enough for nearby guests to hear an attempt to control the narrative. But the moment the curious onlookers turned back to their conversations, she leaned down to whisper frantically in my ear. "Why didn't you say something earlier? Do you have any idea how this makes me look?" Harold, meanwhile, had undergone a complete transformation. Gone was the condescending businessman who had dismissed my little life. In his place was an eager potential business partner, already outlining ventures we might explore together. "Jean, we must schedule a proper meeting next week," he said, his hand now resting familiarly on my shoulder. "I have some fascinating opportunities that would benefit from your expertise and resources." Diana Wilson, not to be outdone, suddenly discovered remarkable similarities between us. "I've always said we have the same taste in art," she declared, though we had never once discussed the subject. "You simply must see our collection. I have a feeling we'll be great friends." Other wedding guests, sensing something significant had occurred, began finding reasons to pass by our table. Those who had ignored me all evening now introduced themselves with exaggerated warmth. Business cards appeared as if by magic, discreetly offered, with murmured suggestions about getting together soon. Throughout this surreal scene, Michael remained stunned, his eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Finally, he gently took my elbow and guided me toward a quiet garden terrace adjacent to the ballroom. "Mom, I need to understand what's happening," he said. Once we were alone, his voice a mixture of confusion and hurt. "Are you really worth billions? Have you been keeping this from me my entire life?" I took a deep breath, searching for the right words to explain a lifetime of deliberate choices. "Yes, Michael. When your father and I sold our company, we received much more than anyone knew. We invested carefully, and over time, those investments grew substantially. But why the secrecy? Why let me think we were just getting by? Why let me take out student loans and work summer jobs when you could have paid for everything?" "Because your father and I didn't want money to define you," I explained gently. We'd seen what happened to children who grew up with excessive wealth and no sense of purpose or effort. We wanted you to develop your own work ethic, to find meaning beyond material things, to value people for who they are, rather than what they own. Michael ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disrupting the perfect wedding day appearance. So instead, you let me struggle. Let me worry about money when I didn't need to. Let Cassandra and her family treat you like you were beneath them. You never really struggled, Michael, I pointed out softly. Your education was paid for. You always had what you needed, just not excessive luxury. As for Cassandra and her parents, how they treated me says more about their character than my worth. Would you have preferred they respected me for my money rather than who I am? He paced the terrace, processing everything. But all these years of living so modestly, when you could have had anything you wanted, I don't understand. I had everything I wanted, I assured him. A comfortable home, meaningful work through my foundation, the freedom to make choices based on values rather than appearances. Your father and I agreed on this approach, and after he died, I honored our decision. Before Michael could respond, Cassandra appeared at the terrace door, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears. She hurried to Michael's side, clutching his arm. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. People are asking questions, and I don't know what to tell them. She turned to me, her composure cracking. Jean, you have to understand, I never would have said those things if I'd known who you really were. The naked opportunism of her statement hung in the air between us. Michael stiffened beside her, perhaps hearing for the first time the implications of her words. Cassandra, I said carefully, would you give me a moment alone with you? There are some things we should discuss privately. After a hesitant glance at Michael, who nodded slightly, Cassandra followed me to the bridal suite. Once the door closed behind us, I turned to face my new daughter-in-law. I want to be very clear, I began. I don't care about your apologies now that you know my financial status. What concerns me is the woman my son has chosen to marry, someone who judges people by their appearance and possessions rather than their character. Cassandra's perfect posture crumpled slightly. You don't understand the pressure I've been under my entire life, she said, sinking onto a velvet ottoman. My parents raised me to believe that status and connections were everything. My mother critiqued every outfit, every friend, every decision based on how it would appear to others. For the first time, I glimpsed something authentic beneath Cassandra's polished exterior. My childhood looked wealthy and privileged from the outside, but it was emotionally empty, she continued. My parents were more concerned with appearances than my happiness. When I met Michael, he was so different from anyone in my social circle. He cared about making a difference, not making an impression. Then why try so hard to change him? I asked. Why mock his background and his mother? Why push him toward a lifestyle that contradicts his values? Tears welled in her eyes again. Because I'm terrified of disappointing my parents. Because I don't know who I am without the trappings and status. Because it's easier to pull Michael into my world than to admit mine might be built on shallow foundations. I hadn't expected such raw honesty, and it softened my anger somewhat. Cassandra, wealth and status are poor substitutes for genuine connection and purpose. Trust me, I've seen both sides. What are you going to do? She asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. Are you going to tell everyone how I treated you? Expose me at my own wedding? I considered the young woman before me, wondering if there was more substance to her than I'd previously believed. No, I said finally. That wouldn't serve any purpose except humiliation, and I don't believe in treating others as they've treated me. But going forward, things will need to change. We rejoined the reception with an uneasy truce. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of strained smiles and curious glances. Harold cornered me twice more with business propositions, which I deflected with non-committal responses. Diana fluttered nearby, suddenly discovering how refreshing my simple fashion choices were. When Michael and Cassandra departed for their honeymoon, the tension between them was visible despite their efforts to maintain a united front. My son hugged me tightly before leaving, whispering, We have a lot more to talk about when I get back. I returned to my modest home that night, kicking off the uncomfortable designer shoes and making a cup of tea in my familiar kitchen. As I sat in Thomas's old armchair, I wondered what he would have thought of the day's events. Would he have approved of my revelation, or would he have counseled continued privacy? My phone rang just after midnight. It was Sophia, eager for details. "Harold Wilson has called my office 3 times already," she reported. "He's practically begging for a meeting with you. Apparently he's researched Horizon Investments and realized just how significant your holdings are." "What do you think I should do about his company?" I asked her. "Keep it. Sell it back to him." "That depends," she replied thoughtfully. "Do you see strategic value in it, or was this just about helping Michael's in-laws?" It was a question I would need time to answer, along with many others that had emerged from this complicated day. 6 months after the wedding day revelation, much had changed in our family dynamics. Michael and I had several long, sometimes difficult conversations about my decades of financial secrecy. Initially hurt and confused, he gradually came to understand our reasons as he observed the dramatic shift in how people treated me once my wealth became known. "I got 3 job offers last month from private schools I never applied to," he told me during one of our now weekly dinners at my home. The headmaster at Westfield Academy mentioned they'd heard I was connected to significant resources that might benefit their endowment. "And how does that make you feel?" I asked, serving the simple pasta dish that had been his favorite since childhood. "Like I'm suddenly valuable for all the wrong reasons," he admitted. "It's exactly what you and Dad were trying to protect me from, isn't it?" His marriage to Cassandra had encountered predictable turbulence. After returning from their honeymoon, she had immediately attempted to leverage my wealth and connections, arranging lunches where she could casually mention her billionaire mother-in-law and suggesting Michael and I invest in various friends' business ventures. She's struggling to figure out who she is in this new reality. Michael explained, his face reflecting the strain of navigating these complex waters. One moment she's talking about charity work and meaningful pursuits, the next, she's showing me real estate listings for mansions we don't need. The turning point came unexpectedly at a charity gala 3 months after the wedding. Cassandra had insisted we all attend, clearly hoping to showcase her connection to me. What she hadn't anticipated was watching renowned business leaders and philanthropists bypassing her parents to seek my opinion on everything from investment trends to educational initiatives. The woman who had dismissed me as the family embarrassment found herself standing in my shadow, suddenly irrelevant in the very social circles where she had once felt superior. That evening marked the beginning of a genuine transformation in Cassandra. Perhaps seeing respect freely given based on expertise and character rather than purchased through displays of wealth triggered something authentic within her. She approached me the following day, asking if we could talk without Michael present. Over coffee in my modest kitchen, she spoke with a sincerity I hadn't witnessed before. "I've spent my entire life believing that worth was measured by possessions and appearances," she said quietly. "Watching you last night, I realized how empty that philosophy is. People respect you not because of your money, but because of your knowledge and integrity." While I remained cautious, her subsequent actions suggested a genuine desire for change. She resigned from her luxury marketing position to volunteer at an educational nonprofit. She began therapy to address the insecurities driving her status obsession. Most significantly, she stopped pressuring Michael to pursue more lucrative career opportunities, instead expressing pride in his commitment to teaching. 2 months later, I arranged a dinner for Michael, Cassandra, and myself to address the future honestly. We sat in my dining room, using the same dishes I'd had for 30 years, though Cassandra no longer wiped her glass before drinking. "I've made a decision about Harold's company," I announced after we'd finished our meal. "I'm going to sell it back to him, but with conditions attached." Cassandra looked up in surprise. "What kind of conditions?" "Ethical ones. Employee protections, sustainable practices, community investment requirements. If he violates these, ownership reverts to my foundation. I turned to Michael. I also want to be more transparent about my philanthropic work, and I'd like both of you to be involved if you're interested. Over dessert, I revealed the full scope of the foundation I'd established years ago, which funded educational opportunities for underprivileged students, medical research for pancreatic cancer, and community development in working class neighborhoods like the one where I grew up. I'd like you both to help direct these efforts, I explained. Not just signing checks, but actually engaging with the communities and causes we support. To my surprise, Cassandra showed the most enthusiasm for this proposal. I've been volunteering with a literacy program in Dorchester, she said. The children there have so much potential but so few resources. Could we expand programming in that area? The genuine passion in her voice suggested that perhaps she was finding purpose beyond social climbing. Michael watched her with a mixture of pride and cautious optimism. In the months that followed, I implemented a comprehensive plan for my wealth, including trusts for Michael with ethical conditions rather than automatic disbursements. I expanded my foundation's work now with Michael and Cassandra actively involved in identifying needs and developing programs. Harold eventually accepted my terms for repurchasing his company, though our business relationship remained strictly professional. Diana occasionally attempted to cultivate social connections, but when those efforts didn't yield invitations or advantages, her interest predictably waned. What surprised me most was the gradual development of a genuine relationship with Cassandra. Without the pressure of status competition, she revealed a thoughtful intelligence and unexpected compassion. When she discovered her own parents had consistently underpaid their household staff, she personally ensured they received years of back wages and benefits. My father always taught me that success meant extracting maximum value from every transaction, she explained when I commented on her actions. You've shown me that true wealth comes from creating value for others. One evening, as Michael and I cleaned up after dinner, while Cassandra finished a call about an upcoming foundation project, he paused beside me at the sink. You know, Mom, I think Dad would be proud of how everything turned out, he said, drying a plate. Not just the money, but how you handled everything with such dignity. I hope so, I replied. He always believed that character reveals itself in how you treat people when there's nothing to gain from them. When Cassandra rejoined us, bringing excitement about a new educational initiative she'd been researching, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. The family we were building wasn't perfect, but it was authentic in a way that no amount of money could purchase. The journey had been painful at times, but the lessons were invaluable. True respect must be earned rather than bought. Wealth can provide comfort but not character. Appearances reveal nothing about a person's worth. And sometimes, the people who seem most superficial are simply lost, needing only a different measure of value to find their way. As I look back on that wedding day humiliation, now I'm grateful for the unexpected gift it ultimately provided. By forcing truth into the open, it created space for genuine relationships to form and authentic values to take root. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on appearances only to have the truth change everything? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button and like this video. Remember that true wealth isn't measured by your bank account, but by the impact you have on others. Thank you for listening, and may you always be valued for who you are, not what you own or how you look.